All right, let's start. So, if you remember the last time, I think I did cover IAM roles. I did already, but I just wanted to repeat it in this class because I'm not entirely sure if everyone got the concept right. But the concept of IAM roles is very simple. It's very, very simple. But I also wanted to repeat it just to make sure, like a refresher and then like a good place for us to start today's session. So that's really why I wanted to talk about IAM roles because I talked about it. I also even did an example, but here is just for me to solidify that knowledge. I remember the last time for our Builders Day, we did focus on using policies, creating users, creating groups. So we did all that. We did all the managed policies, the like AWS managed, customer managed. We did the inline policy, but we didn't really do anything around roles. We are going to do that for the next Builders Day. But I also wanted to use this call to stress it, just so that you know what it means. So at the cloud practitioner level, honestly, like IAM roles are like a fundamental part of your journey, right? Because the roles are designed primarily for you to get temporary credentials. And don't worry, you get to understand what long-term credentials means, especially in the concept of using your access keys. Right now, most of us log into the console, but at some point, I'm going to show you some other ways how you can interact with the AWS system that is out there. Okay, so how you can interact with your account. And because a lot of those interactions, they form more or less like long-term access. And that's why there's a concept of roles that gives you more or less like short-term access. So it's like a temporary credential that you can use to access your AWS environment. But at the stage where you are right now, you are aiming for the cloud practitioner, right? So what you really need to know about roles is that when two services in AWS needs to communicate, right? That's really one place you use roles. So if a service in AWS needs to communicate with another service, for the most part, you need like a service role, meaning service A that is trying to talk to service B will need a role for it to do that. Okay, so that's one of the best way I can explain it to you. But the good thing about a role is that a role still shares many of the knowledge you have. So more or less like a role has a set of permissions also. So it means that the fact that a service A can use the role to talk to service B does not mean it can do everything. It basically means that you still have to tell the service A what it can do. And that's how you define it with a role. Okay? So if you see the definition there, it's really an IAM identity that has a specific permission, but it's not tied to a long-time credential. Okay? And like I've mentioned, that's one thing that differentiates it from the user credential that you have seen. Because right now you log in as a console, but the truth is that you can also get access keys, and we'll see that as time goes on. But you can get access keys from your user, and that gives you like long-time credential where it never expires unless that key is deleted. But that's where role comes in because role can allow one service to talk to another service, but just for a short time, right? And when you see specific permissions there, it also boils back like it boils down to how we were using policies, right? Where we created a policy for a user or we created a policy for a group, and then we give it specific permission, right, for it to use to do anything within the AWS account. So it is actually designed to be assumed for temporary permissions, right? And temporary credentials, because why? When you assume a role, it gives you a credential and you can use it, right? And once you are done, you can let that credential go. Okay. But again, you'll see more like from a specific example. And so when you think about common use cases, like I said, one of the common use cases that you need to know at this level is that think about it. One AWS service needs to talk to another AWS service, another AWS service. That's like a place where you don't have to use a user, right? You need to use like a role. And you see it as an example just now. So for example, the simple one that I put here, if you have like an EC2 instance trying to access S3, remember, we're in the cloud. So EC2 is a service, right? And then S3 is also a service. Now it's like one service trying to communicate to another service. And for them to do that, you need a role in between that gives EC2 the permission to talk to S3. Okay. Cross-account access, yes, it's also possible. You don't need to stress about it at this level. But remember, you have your account. I have my own account. And with a role, I can actually allow you to do something in my account. And that's what it means. That's what it's called. That's what's referred to as cross-account, meaning you are leaving your account to perform another operation in someone else's account. Okay. And then identity federation is also something I don't want to stress you with, but identity federation basically just helps you federate identity from somewhere else. So if someone is already using Google Auth, Google signing, basically you can still use your Google authentication identity to go into your AWS account, but that's like at an advanced level. So let me show you what that looks like. So if you see me just now, I was drawing the diagram, right? So this is a simplistic way of looking at it. So if you see here, let me try to zoom it in a bit, and then we'll practicalize it. So what it means is that this is an EC2 instance, right? It's a service in AWS, and Lambda is also a service. But what you see on the right side is also a service. S3 is also a service. It's like a storage service, right? Amazon SNS is like a pub sub service. They're all services in their own right. But you oftentimes find a Lambda trying to interact with some other services within your AWS account, right? And that is where a role comes in. Because without a role in between, there's no way a Lambda function will be able to talk to SNS. Neither will there be a way for a Lambda function to talk to an S3 bucket, or maybe EC2 talking to SNS. So just think about it that if one service in AWS needs to communicate with another service, that's like a very good use case of a role. Okay, so a role is not a user, but they are similar because they still have like permissions that determines in this case what service A can do. Okay, so let me try to show you what that looks like. This is really a good example of how I'll show you. So here I'm creating, so I'm going to Lambda functions, right? So I'm going to create a function quickly. Like I say, test function is basically nothing. Let me see. Is it zoomed in properly? Let me zoom it. Let me zoom it a bit. Can you see this clearly? I think it's clear. I can see it clearly. So I'm creating the test function in the account. Okay. This is Lambda. So Lambda here is a service. So I'm creating a test Lambda function, right? For runtime, in this case, I'm just choosing Python 3.3. And then I'll leave every other thing as default. So I'm just going to create a function. I'm going to create a function. So let's give it some time for the function. From the diagram, it shows all services interacting only with the role and not amongst themselves. Yeah. So what I was trying to explain from the diagram is the fact that, yeah, the Lambda is trying to go to SNS, right? But it's going through an IAM role. That's what I'm trying to explain. It's basically like a connection. Ideally, I'm supposed to write assume. So the Lambda will assume an IAM role for it to use SNS. Okay. So there's a role in between. Lambda cannot just talk to SNS without a role. And you see what I mean by that example. So the function is here basically. Right now, it has just something that says hello from Lambda, right? And if I test it, if I just run test, it's going to give me something basic, right? So this is exactly the result. Hello from Lambda. So here, I think I have a code that I've written. It's not a big, like it's just something small. Let me try to see if I can pull it up. Let me move this a bit. Let's see. So I have a Lambda function that I've already created. There like a function code that I want to use. So I'm going to copy it and paste. So if I do control, I think control A. So I'm just going to go back to this code and I'm going to replace everything that you see in there. So what am I doing here? But again, you don't just get the concept, okay? You don't really need to understand the code for now. You don't need to, but I'm just trying to show you something. So here I am initiating, I'm more or less like I'm initializing Boto. Boto will get to understand what Boto is. It's like an SDK for you to use code to talk to your AWS resource. And in this case, I'm saying I need the SNS client. And then I'm trying to say, basically, I'm trying to call a function that says list all the topics in my account. And for each of them, just print out the result, right? So I'm going to deploy this function. And once I deploy this function, I'm going to test it and see what I get. So go back to testing. Let's test again and see what we get this time. Now, it's simple. Can you see my screen? So what it's saying, is it clear enough? Can you see my screen clearly? Is it clear? Can you see the error that came out? Let me know if you can't see it, because you need to see it for me to continue. Yes, okay. So Pedro can see, TS Glam can see. So you can see there, it's clearly stated. So I created a brand new Lambda, and I was trying to basically just list all the topic in my account. Okay, I'm trying to list all the topic in my account, but it says that, and I'm trying to list all the topic in my account, but the Lambda now is getting an error, and the error is very simple. It said you are not authorized to list topics in this account, right? And that's exactly what I was trying to show you in the diagram, saying that if Lambda needs to talk to another service, it needs some set of permission, and that's where a role comes in. Right now, it doesn't have a role, so there's no way, there's no permission that gives it explicit access to list topics from SNS. Okay. So what do? I can go back to the configuration. I can go back to the permission. There is already a role that was created for me, right? So if you see, there is already a role. So if I check here, there is a role actually. It's not like there's no role. It's just that it doesn't have the permission that it needs. Okay. So when you go there, currently it has like a very basic permission, which is Lambda basic execute role. And if I check what that Lambda looks like, it's very simple. It basically has this. So by now, this should not be new to you, right? You can see it has an effect to allow, it has action to be create log stream, put log streams on a particular resource, right? Is the Lambda role created automatically with no permissions? Yes, it is created with the basic permission. Because usually every Lambda function, when you execute it, it streams a log. So most times it's created with the basic permission, which is it creates a log group. Don't worry, we'll see all that as time goes on. Okay, we'll see all that as time goes on. But it creates a basic rule that it uses, and in this case, it's just trying to create a log group and then put things inside the log group. Now, what do you think would happen? So if I try to update this permission and I copy this, because I know the problem my Lambda function is currently having, so I'm just going to edit this. Remember, at this stage that you are, you should know how to do this already, because this is a basic policy, right? So I'm just going to paste this here. And what am I going to do? I'm just going to say SNS in this case. You can even go back to the error. The error is here, it's clear. Where's that function that I was executing? I think it's up here, right? From from the error says it needs the list topic permission, right? So I can go back here and just say list topic. I can get rid of this one. For now, I don't really care. Basically, I can say start. So I don't really care. So I think this is good enough. Let me do next. Yeah, it's good. So you can see, although it's warning me, I think it's looking like maybe the permission is too permissive and all that, but I don't really care. So let me just save changes. So now if you check the Lambda permission itself, it has the ones that it had before, right? And then there is new one that we added, which is list the topics in this account. We don't care any of the resources. You should be able to do it. So it's kind of similar to what you already know. This is a policy. But now I think from our builders day, you already know how to build policies, whether it's custom. In this case, it's a custom policy, right? So it's a policy that is attached to the IAM role of the Lambda. So if I go back to the function, what do you think will happen when I try to now test it again? So if I go back here and I click test, what happens? Let's see. This one is here. Let's see. I think sometimes it takes time for the permission to kick in, but let's see. I deploy again. No changes to deploy. Let me test again. And let's do this. What is this saying this time? Test function is not right to perform SNS. List topics. Yeah, I think I have this permission. Maybe he wants more permission or what? Let's see. Is this even set correctly? Let's see. This is the role it's using. So you can see roles, and there's a particular role we are using, right? So it's failing. Yeah, it's normal. It's one of those things you do. So you have to get used to it. Why is it even showing this? List topic. Something is maybe not right. I'm not sure. What's the problem? Okay. Let's do edit. Let me just say SNS. In this case, list topics. Let me just add it. AWS service or resources, add resource. Where am I? I'm in US East or what? Interesting. Okay, so let me get rid of this one and see. Maybe the policy is just, I'm actually not supposed to be here. I'm in US East 1, so I'm supposed to be in US West 2. That's usually my default region where I like to operate. But let's see. Remember, we also talked about regions, and we talked about, yeah, you can see the difference, right? It's working now. So you can see it's working, right? But there's no topic. So now it's working because the policy has been corrected, right? Now it shows me all the topics. So what would happen if I try to create an SNS topic? So what you just need to get from here, I'm just trying to show you what the role, what an IAM role is. An IAM role is basically something that one service is going to assume for you to be able to, I don't really care about the name. I don't care. Let me just create this. So topics is here, and I have just one test topic, right? So if I go back to my function this time and I test again, what do you think I'm going to get? I'm going to get that function that I just created. Yeah, you can see there is a function. So what am I trying to explain? You can see that before now, the Lambda could not do anything. So Lambda, when I just created it and it had no permission, it could not really talk to SNS. But because I went and I updated the function and I said, for the policy, the role that you're using, I need you to be able to access SNS. And once that was done, I could access, I could now see SNS, the SNS topics that are in the account. Okay. So just know as part of your journey that most times a service in AWS would need to talk to another service. And there's always the concept of using a role for that to happen. Okay. So that's all you need to know. Don't stress beyond that point. We'll continue to unravel as we go. So this diagram explains it well. And the demo that I also showed explains it also very well. Okay. So what's next? So we've just seen a sample, right? In this case, it was Lambda that was trying to access SNS. But what you see in the slide is EC2 trying to access S3. Okay. It changed the permission to come with SNS. Yeah. So I just updated the permission. So with that out of the way, let's now talk about what is the difference between an IAM user and an IAM role, right? We now need to look at what is the difference between the both of them. I think the differences are actually obvious, but I just wrote them here so that you can follow along. Basically, a user represents person or application. There is a reason why it's not just a person. There's a reason why it's an application too, because why you can use your user credential and put it in an application, and that application can represent you. So that's why you see a specific person or application. I know some people would think, oh, like it should be a user. I am a user, yes. But the thing is that you can actually fetch your credential from your user and put it in an application, and that will give them access. Okay, so you know. And then what about IAM role? IAM role is really an identity, like I said, that can be assumed for temporary permissions. Okay, so it means that it's not the same. It's not the same. One is an identity that you need to take upon at a given time for you to be able to interact with a different service, while the other one is really a specific person. So it's either it's a specific person using it or an application that is talking on the person's behalf. Okay, so they are both different. One is long-term credential, exactly. So for a user, yes, password, when you log in, you're always in the account. Nothing takes you out unless maybe like there's something that says after being logged in for a while, take the person out of the system, maybe log the person out. But for the most part, your long time, it's like a long time credential. So as we'll see as time goes on, when you fetch your access key as a user and you use it in an application, it's really long time. It doesn't break, right? It's there until maybe you go and like delete the access key. Okay. But for roles, it's temporary. And that's why AWS recommends role for the most part, right? Because it's really temporary, meaning that the connections are always refreshed at some point. Meaning if someone had access to it and you just went and you deleted the role, once they try again, they might not get access. So it's like best practice to use roles, especially where it is most applicable. Okay. So authentication, like I mentioned, username and password is really what you use for the most part as a user, right? You already do that. You go to your account, especially your non-root account, you put your username, you put your account ID, and your password, you log in, right? But for roles is when you assume the role. So the only thing we didn't see, we knew there was a service A that was using a role, but we didn't really see what it was doing. We don't really care. But as time goes on, you understand really what it's doing, because that same thing that it's doing, you can do it. You can force that process out. But what we just saw a Lambda, we gave it a role and we gave it a permission, and that was it. We didn't really see what was happening behind the scene. But with time, you get to understand what's happening, because actually Lambda is assuming a role, getting a set of temporary credential, and calling the SNS topic. Okay. What's the primary use case? Yeah, human users, basically, for user. Like if there was like a user involved, like that's one place you should use like an IAM user. And then also persistent application, an application that needs to, like, the lifetime is longer, you should use IAM user. But when you think about like cross-service accounts, or one service talking to another service, you don't use a user in those kind of cases. That's where a role comes in. For MFA support, we'll soon learn what MFA is, but for MFA, basically for the user, yes, it's supported, and we're going to set one up in this call. And then the entity assuming a role, for example, if the role itself was being assumed by a human, and there was a, what do you call it, and there was an MFA attached to that user, then yes, the role is also going to get it. Okay, so I think that explains it. So, but you can always follow up to see the difference. So now, we just talked about role. If you remember, I've done this in the last course. So if you watch the video, I've already done it, but I'm just repeating it, just because it's a concept that sometimes people, it's usually like hard to grasp at the first time. And that's why for the next Builders Day session, you just need to know, you need to create yours. You need to build yours, okay? That's the whole idea. I won't just rely on the fact that you know it. I will want to rely on the fact that you can also build it yourself, okay? So what is multi-factor authentication? I think everyone here has one way, is using one multi-factor authentication one way or the other. And if you're not using, I would suggest you start using, especially for your critical accounts. So like for me, there are really critical accounts that MFA has to be enabled, basically. So for like my Gmail, even my TikTok has MFA. Like it has to be, because what it means is that before you can use my account, it's not just having my password alone. There might be other things you need for you to be able to gain access to my account, right? And so when you say multi-factor, it just means one or more things are required for that authentication to happen, right? So two or more verification factors for signing. Two-factor is two, right? But multi-factor can be multi, right? So many things happening for you to gain access, right? And why does it happen? Really, it gives you extra security, right? So it adds more or less like adds extra security. Because if you look at the diagram here, and there is a link where I got that from, so I didn't draw that, I didn't do that myself, but really it's about something you know. So in this case, if you think about it, when you created your account, you had a username and a password. You know that, right? And but again, there is also the possibility for you to add. There's an and or something you are, right? So in this case, maybe your fingerprint, maybe like a physical device attached to your laptop, right? And then and or something you have, right? So something you are, you can see is different from something you have. Like something you have could be like a mobile phone, right? You can use like a mobile phone and use. I'm sure a lot of us do it. Like me, I have like the Authenticator app, where most of the apps that I use, I basically use that, right, to authenticate. So and then that verifies you. So there are some cases where you need to use all these layers, and some cases they'll just say it's two-factor, right? So just present two. I know that on TikTok here I have like three set up, right? I have like my authenticator, my phone set up, and then my password. So you need like a combination of those three for you to gain access to my account, right? So that's really MFA. So when you now think about AWS, MFA is really, honestly, when you go for the exams, nobody will stretch you on anything MFA. Just know MFA is MFA. And you should know that the reason why you do MFA is because of enhanced security, right? Especially so it's something you're also going to learn, especially for critical users, right? Or critical, like I told you in the last Builders call, we did set up an admin account, like an admin user. There's a root user, but I told you the root user is not something you should be using for your day-to-day activity, right? You need to create an admin out of it. So I can show you what that translates to, right? So if you check here that I'm logged in right now, this is me. But if you notice on the left, there is also a root user here. it's two different people in the same account. Okay, so here this is a root user. You can see root is clearly stated here. But for in this case, there is Brainyl here, stated here. Okay, so what it means is that for these two critical people, one is an admin, one is a root user. For them, I have to set up MFA. In fact, MFA is like a recommended best practice for all your users, basically. So any user that has to be in your account, because why? Depending on the permission one user has, if someone should compromise that permission, it's going to affect your account, right? And you don't want that to happen. So it means that if you have 10 users, you should be able to enforce everybody to have like a multi-factor authentication. In this case, I know you are still the same person, but it means that every user account you create, you have to try to create like a multi-factor authentication along with it. Okay. So when you think about it, there are really, and we're going to see it's very simple, honestly, from the perspective of AWS. I think all you need to know is really the fact that MFA gives you like an advanced level of security. Remember, we talked about the role, permission, like we've told you that a role is something you probably will need for one service to talk to another service. But even within that role, you can tune the permissions, right? You can say you're only allowed to do this, right? That's one. But we've also told you that even as a user, you can put a permission inside the user and say you're only allowed to do this. That's this one level. Even you can put that user in a group and still say, as a group, you are only allowed to do this. That's one level, right? But like the highest level of it all is to make sure that every user in your account really has MFA, like multi-factor authentication enabled. And we obviously know, because the thing is that it means that if they log into the console, for them to do anything, they need to authenticate, right? Using not just username and password, because if it's compromised, you are more or less like depending on something extra to make sure that that authentication flow is correct. Okay. So what are the options you see? There's really passkey, right? And those ones are the ones that use like the FIDO2, more or less like they conform with the FIDO2 hardware key. So for example, if you were going to set up like one that uses like a hardware key, I think if you there's like a YubiKey, there's a device called YubiKey where if you want to set it up, you can actually just plug it to your computer. And when you get to the AWS page where you're supposed to use a hardware key, it already recognizes it because it's connected to your computer. And then you can press like a biometrics on the device, and then it's just going to but you see that what it looks like. It's just that we can't go through it because that's like it's like a hardware device. But one thing you need to understand is first you need to understand the process, and basically you also need to set up just one, like just try one, and that will give you an idea of how the other ones will be set up as time goes on. Okay. So there's also the authenticator app. Basically, most of the people on this call, I think you may be used to the authenticator app already, because if you've ever used Google Authenticator, Authy, yes, they give you room for you to more or less like get a code, and then like you take a picture of a like a what do they call it? Like you see a diagram, you take a picture of it, and then you have to type in the code, right? So that works. And then there's also the hardware TOTP token, right? And basically the hardware TOTP token most times works on the there's also a standard where you can use it. Specifically, some of these devices you can only get them from AWS, so you get them from AWS. Especially maybe not directly from AWS, but AWS partners that sell some of these devices, because you need to get the right device. Yes, QR code. That's the word. You need to get the right device for you to be able to set them up. Okay. And then recommendation here, really, you have to enable the MFA, enable MFA on the root user and privilege IAM users. Like I mentioned, somebody who is just allowed to list something in your account, maybe an SNS stuff, you don't really care much about those people. But for people who have like admin access, people who are root users, it's a must. They have to have like MFA set up as part of their account. Okay. So it's a recommended best practice. So when you see the options in AWS, there are really three options here if you wanted to set up one, right? So there's the Authenticator app. That one is like easy for everyone to set up. I expect you to set it up. If you want to set it up, you can even do it on this call, or you can do it on the day we are doing like a builders day, but you need to set one up for your account, okay? And there's also like the passkey and security key, like I mentioned. If you see the diagram there, you see that there is like something that looks like a USB stick. There's something that looks like a fingerprint. So this is easy. If you want to set them up and you pick the option, it basically will be looking at your computer because most of them have that FIDO2, they conform with the FIDO2 security key. So it's going to expect you to more or less like, especially for the one that is like a YubiKey that you're going to attach, it's going to expect you to press on it. Okay, so they are basically easy to set up. I think what you need to know at this level is really the concept itself, MFA, meaning there's outside your username and a password, there's an extra level of security required for you to get into your account. Okay. And then there's also the hardware token, right? I don't know how many of you have it. I've seen a token before, but I have one here. This is like a token, right? It's a token. So usually there is like tokens you can get from AWS recommended sellers. It comes like this as a token. Behind it, there's usually like a hardware number. So when you want to, I'll show you what it looks like setting up in the screen. Okay, let me see if there's something else. So let's go and see what it looks like. So we are here. I'm not the root here. So let me just go here and do security credential. So take note, you find it in the security credential. So if it's here, you can see I already have one, right? So I have one set up already. Let me see. So if I wanted to create a new one, like for example, right, I can let's see what the passkey. If you're going to go through the passkey, let's say passkey for example, we won't be able to do it because I don't have the device. But if you were going to go through passkey, for example, and you do next here, you can see it's already asking me because he expects that there is a device connected to my laptop that should be able to let me go through this process. Okay. So I'm just going to cancel it because I don't have that device. Okay. And then for the second one, but honestly, you don't really need to keep track of all these things. They're easy to set up once you have the right device. So if I go to like token, let's say hardware token, for example, and I try to set up this one, what is going to require is that there's a serial number I have to put here. Like I showed you, I have one. There's like I have a token from my like one of my institutions. I have a token here. Usually at the back there'll be a serial number, and then once you put in the serial number, and then you put in the first code that is showing, you put it, and then put the second one that is showing, and then add MFA. It knows it's going to activate it already. But the device is not just any device. It's not just any device. You have to get it from AWS. Okay. But the easy one to really set up is really this one, which is this basically. So if I wanted to do like an authenticator, let me say authenticator app, right? For example, and I do next. So basically, I think TechNet is what TechNet was saying. Basically, there's like you do this. So you just scan this QR code, right? So when you scan this QR code right now, because I'm using my phone to do recording, I might not be able to do it because my auth is actually on that phone. But it's simple, and I would expect you to do it at some point. So you scan this, and then you put the first device in here, the first code, and then you wait for it to generate another code, and then you put it here, and that's it. You add it as MFA, okay? So what it means is that once you add the MFA, every time you go to the login page, like you see, I have mine because why? This is my root account. There's no way I will not have one set up. Okay. So the good thing about it is that whenever you now go to your login page and you're trying to log in, it's going to ask you for. There's now an extra step for you. Yes. So Phil said he has set it up. So I expect everyone on this call who's following me on this journey, you have to set up one. Like you can see, I have it here, not just here, but even in my admin account. If I go to my security credentials, you see I have another one. So it's easy to set up. It's not hard. So you can see there's one here. You can see this is AWS training admin. It's different from the one that is AWS training root. Okay. So there are two different keys that I have to set up. You need one. You need to create one because why? These are critical users in my account that I don't want any of their details to be compromised. Okay. You can ask any question if there's any place that is not clear to you. My phone right now I'm using it, but honestly, that's one of the things we are going to do on the builders day because if you come here, you have to reproduce and make sure that you're getting it. So you have to do it yourself. If you have not, Phil said he has already set up his own, but if you have not, you replay it when the time comes. So what is IAM best practice? Basically, principle of least privilege. If you remember how we've been setting up all our policies, even as at the builders day when we're building, if you notice, we weren't just giving expansive, like we weren't just giving like very we're just giving very wide permissions. We're giving permissions based on what we wanted a user or a group to do, right? We tested the same with a role. We said a role was trying to list topics, and for that reason, we gave it just permission for it to list topic. And that's really the principle of least privilege. You are going to see throughout your journey, whether you're starting as a practitioner now, but as you grow in your journey, you're going to see all this. It's basically the idea that give people or applications or entities only the permission that they need for them to do what they want to do. Okay. So it's really the principle of least privilege, meaning don't give people more than the permission they need at every given time. Okay. What other best practices there? I just mentioned it. Enabling of your multi-factor authentication, especially for the root user and privileged users. Okay. And if you've not been on this call, you remember I talked about password policies, right? Password policy is something you set at an admin level to guide every other person who is creating password to follow the pattern. So you can say it has to have this length, it has to be this strong. I think we did that at some point at the beginning of the class. And also, you cannot share your credentials, right? Because why? Your AWS account credential uniquely identifies you, and for that reason, you cannot share your credential. You can't. Because why? If someone has it, the person can do something on your behalf. That's basically what happens. And that's why roles are good, because I can give you a role for you to assume. And if you assume the role, based on the permissions that are defined on that role, you can do only the things I grant you access to do. Okay? So don't share credentials, but use roles if there is ever any need for you to do something around that line. Okay? Again, we'll see some of these things, but again, if you have access keys, I know you don't know what access keys now is. Now we'll get there very soon. But if there was access keys that you generated as a user, you basically would have to find a way to regenerate them some other time, like more or less like refresh. The whole idea is just for you to regularly rotate your access keys. So and then you have to monitor. So one thing you should also understand, I think I mentioned it at the beginning, that CloudTrail is everywhere. And the word is clear, CloudTrail. It trails everything that is happening in the cloud. So because a user, a group, a role, they're all entities, there is somewhere in CloudTrail where you can see that this person did this. Okay, so the trail helps you keep a trail. And sometimes it's actually good for you to go and monitor those kind of events, right? To have an idea of what someone is doing, to see if the person is doing beyond what they're meant to be doing, or if they're doing what is expected of them. Okay, and then you can also use things like last access versus credential reports to more or less like do more. And I'm going to show you what those looks like now. Okay, but last access itself it basically shows you the last the access times, right, for someone. So more or less like last access, meaning the last time someone accessed something. So what it means is that if you have that kind of information, it can basically help you know if this person has not accessed this particular service in the last 1 year, maybe the person does not need the permission. You can prune it up, right? And then credential report itself, it gives you like an audit of all the IAM users and their credential status. And we're going to see that one very soon. But they're all best practice. So it means at some point you need to continue to evaluate this list to make sure that you are more or less like following up the stance, the security stance of your account. Okay. So what's IAM? What's IAM? Like the shared responsibility around IAM. Like I said, the IAM infrastructure itself is not your business. AWS is going to handle that, right? I think I've mentioned that before. So if you think about it, IAM itself is a service, meaning there's something behind that powers it, right? So AWS does that for you. You don't really need to. It's not your business to handle. What about the service availability, like ensuring that the service is available? Most of the AWS services are available, highly available, right? So it never goes down. Like you want to log in and you can't log in, or you need like credentials given to you and you don't have it. No, so there's guarantee that it's always going to be available. But who ensures that? AWS will do that, right? What about the service features? Like who is managing all that, providing the managed policies and rules? AWS will do that, right? But what is your own role? Your own role is basically the management, the identity management itself. So if you see on this call, we've created users, we had to do it ourselves. We created groups, we created rules, all that we had to do it ourselves. So the responsibility falls on us. What about access control? So for example, policies. If you have to set the right policies, it's our role to do. AWS is not going to do that for us, right? What about securing the user's credentials? Things like the passwords, the MFA, that's us to enable. Remember, these are best practice, but nobody will force you to do anything, right? So it means that it lies on our hands to follow best practice to make sure our account is secure. Okay. And then, like I also told you, CloudTrail can help you audit, more or less like do an audit of people who are logged in, who are doing things, whatever they're doing. So it's our role to also do that auditing. You don't expect AWS to do it for you, right? So right now you can see where our responsibility lies. Responsibility in this case is you, right? It's you. You are the customer. You are the one using AWS account. So the things at the bottom right of the screen is what you are meant to be doing. And then the things at the top left is what AWS is expected to do on their own end, right? Cool. So I think there's one more thing that I didn't show you. So let's go back to it. So if we go back to the account, I think I showed you. So let's go to credential report. So we talked about credential reports, although this account is new, so I'm not sure what is going to come out of it. But if I download credential reports, so what does credential reports mean? Is basically at an account level, you can see everyone like in the account and when last has their credential been used. That's just credential report, basically. I'm not sure why it's not, but if you check the documents, like the document that I usually release as part of the call, I think for some reason I missed it in the slide, okay? But you'll see where I explained it, what it is, okay? But if you generate this report, for example, right, it's here. If I open this CSV, I'm not sure what it's going to open with, but let's see. So you can see it's just a simple report. It basically tells you, here it tells you who the user is. So this is root account, you can see, right? So let me zoom it in a bit, right? So you can see here, it basically tells you. So credential report is basically at an account level, telling you it's like a report, right, at an account level. So it tells you here, you can see two unique users. There's a root user, there is the Brainyl user, right? And it gives you the unique person's ARN, right? And it tells you password enabled, if there's password enabled for that person, when the password was last used, when the password was last changed, So if I wanted to ask you, the only time you see some of these things in the question is basically, it depends on what you are doing. So if you were trying to look at, basically at a glance, look at all the users in your account and see how their credentials have been used, credential report is where you should go to, right? So think about it, account level audit of the people in the account, when last did they log in, when last did they use like the access key, because if you scroll down, it's a long list. So you can even see if there's an access key attached to the person and when last was it used. Some of these things are not applicable right now because I don't have any access key. I've not generated any, right? So this can tell you the person has one access key and this was the last time it was used, okay? So this is at the level of the account, okay? That's why it gives you all the list of the users. So if there were like 10 users in the account, it's going to give you all that. And it's going to give you a breakdown of their passwords when it was last used, okay? So I'm going to leave there. So now, when we now leave there, I told you there's last accessed and there's also credential report, right? So I just explained what credential report is. So what is last accessed? So if I go now to my users, I only have one user, which is the Brainyl user, right? If I click on that user, right, there's an option here, right, which is last accessed, right? And basically, if I give it some time, it's going to load. This one is very, very important also. Think about it that you have given a user so many credentials. You've given it, like, think about it. The Brainyl user that you see in this account is my admin user, meaning it's second to my root user. I don't use my root user for day-to-day activity, but I use my Brainyl user for my day-to-day activity. And if I go and check the policy on that user, so let me explain it further. If I go back to my user and I see the policy attached to it, you see this administrator access is a very powerful access. So I've given this person administrator access. So Brainyl in this account is an administrator, right? It's just like the way moderators are in my room right now. They can do more things than, so this person is an admin. But so the question is that if I go to last accessed, right, I'm trying to say, what has Brainyl used recently? And this list is very, very good because over time it can help you think about, it can actually help you see the things Brainyl is not even using. And it's a good way for you to trim down the permissions that Brainyl has. So if I see that in this list, maybe you barely use Lambda. So why am I giving you Lambda permission? Remember we talked about the principle of least, privilege access, right? So the principle of least privilege, meaning give people just the permission they need to do their work, right? Don't just expose permissions to them whether they need it or not. So last access is a good way you can go back and check. So you can see some of these services, I've used them recently, right? So administrator access, all these things, last access has been today. It shows me these ones, I did them, I used them yesterday. So you actually order them down, right? So what about if I go further? You see, I've never used any of these things. I've never used any of these ones, right? If I go further, I'm not using these things. I'm not using them. So it's always a good way you can go back to your users in your account to see what access you have given to them and what access are they actually using, okay? And that can help you basically prune down your account in such a way that people have just the right access they need, okay? There are more levels you can go with this, but you're not at that level just yet. So at the practitioner level, just know that there is last accessed, which means you're talking about a person and when he last used a service, right? Because if you gave him permission and he's not using the permission to access any of the service, you can as well take that permission away from him. And then credential report is at an account level. You can see all the users in your account and then see what they have, like all the keys they have, all their passwords. It's not showing you the password, but it's showing you when last their password was used, right? I think that's clear enough. So this wraps up our IAM section. Okay, so I think honestly, if you followed me from the beginning to now, there is no information that you don't know yet at this level about IAM. Trust me. I think I've shared everything. So if just a recap, we started by trying to explain what IAM is. IAM is a gatekeeper. It's the one that tells you, it's the one that knows your identity and knows your access, meaning, and that's why it's called identity and access management. So it knows your identity, it knows you're a user, and it knows what you have access to, right? So when you get into the account, automatically it knows who you are and what you have access to, right? And we talked about the kind of entities we have in an account, right? We said the user is there, we said the role is there, and then we said the group is there, right? We said the user is just one single person, right? And then the group helps for us to group people together. So you can have multiple users in the same group in as much as they have like a logical function, right? So think about it. Admins could be in one group, right? And developers can be in one group. That's just the concept of grouping people just to give them one permission set instead of managing it at a user level, right? And then we talked about roles being an entity that is one service has to use to communicate with another service in an AWS account, right? So once we identified all those entities, we also now started talking about the kind of permissions that exist in AWS. We said that there is the AWS managed policy, and it's just a policy in AWS where there are so many AWS managed policies. So if you're ever thinking of a policy to give to a user, a policy to give to a group, a policy to give to a role, and there's already one that AWS has created, why reinvent the wheel? You can use that. But as part of this call, we also realized that sometimes those policies don't meet your need, and that's why you create a customer managed policy, right? Just to fill in the gaps that the AWS managed policy does not have. So customer management is like it's your own custom policy in there, and you're using it, right? And then we talked about inline policy. So customer managed and AWS managed is the same. It's just that one is managed by you, the other one is managed by AWS, right? Good. And then we now talked about the last type of policy, which is the inline policy. We said that inline policy is called inline for a reason, meaning you are attaching it to an entity. It's still a policy, so it still has the same elements, right, that we explained. What a policy will usually have, things like allow, the resource, the condition, all those things, it will still have it. The only difference is that for inline policy, you're attaching it to an entity, and the lifetime of the policy is dependent on the lifetime of the entity. So if you delete the entity, the policy is also going to be deleted, right? And we've seen all that. And then today we discussed extensively MFA. We told you what it is and what it does. Don't worry in our builders call, because right now my phone that I'm supposed to show you MFA is I'm using it for the stream. So, but on the builders, you have to create an MFA yourself, and you see it's very easy. What you should focus on is what MFA does for you. It's like an added security to your account, okay? And then we also talked about the fact that in an account, it's not just creating users, it's not just giving them permissions. Over time, you want to have an idea of what they're seeing. CloudTrail is one place you can see what people are doing in the account. So, like when I listed the topics from a Lambda, if I go to CloudTrail, I'll see those kind of information. But we said even at the IAM level, there's something we call credential, like a credential report, right? That tells you everyone in the account, their credentials, and it gives you an idea of when it was last used, if there were any access key attached to a user, and when it was also last used. And we said you can also go into a particular user and see last accessed, right? What are the services the person the person used recently, right? And where that is useful is that if I've given you so many permissions, right? That kind of list is where I can go back and see, oh, you've not used this in the last 1 year, you didn't even use these permissions, right? That's a good sign for me to take that permission away from you because you don't need it. If you go a year and not use a particular permission, you don't need it because why? It ties into the least privilege, meaning give them just the privilege they need. Don't give them more than what they need. And you see the way I'm saying this thing simple, you're going to see throughout your journey, even at professional certifications, like if you were going for the professional architect, professional DevOps professional, least privilege is a security best practice that you see. And sometimes when you start writing your certifications, one thing you understand is that it depends on the level you are. There are some solutions that they will look similar, but they will tell you which one is more secure or which one is more. There will be little things that makes an answer better than the other answer. Okay. I think I've summarized it. That's really the summary. So that's the end of IAM for cloud practitioner level. So